I'm Addison Smith with Campus Reform. Today we're joined by Professor Jason Kilborn. Professor Kilborn is a law professor at the University of Illinois, Chicago, who's been the subject of heavy scrutiny recently after he used redacted slurs on a law question exam about workplace discrimination. This prompted the university to suspend him and force him to undergo diversity training before returning to the classroom. Kilborn has since then filed a lawsuit against the university in conjunction with the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. Professor Kilborn, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start from the beginning from your point of view. You give this exam to law students and you have a question on there about an example of workplace discrimination. In the question, you use the letters N and B to allude to slurs, but the words are obviously redacted. The full word is not displayed. So this caused a lot of controversy. What played out after that led up to your suspension?
It was about 3 days before Christmas in 2020, and my dean sent me this message. I vaguely recall it was fairly early in the morning, and she said something to the effect of, the vice dean and I need to talk to you about some concerns relating to your classes this past fall. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, concerns about my classes. What in the world could this be about? I was quite nervous, as you can imagine, but I responded right away. Yes, let's jump on a Zoom call, whatever we need. So several days later, maybe it was the next event, it was either a day or two after that, we get in this Zoom call and she reveals to me, she says, a number of people or something effective, it's been suggested that you used a racial slur on your exam. I mean, let that sink in because this is important, it seems to me. You used a racial slur on your exam. I mean, so my immediate reaction, of course, is to point out I did not use a racial slur on my exam. And I don't think that that's being a cheeky law professor to make that observation. Any reasonable person, when confronted with you used a racial slur, has in mind my screaming at a student who belongs to that racial group an epithet. That's clearly not what happened here. And not only that, the entire word wasn't spelled out because I wasn't born under a rock. I understand full well the very deep and very painful and horrific history of that word, which is why, of course, I put it on my exam, right? I wanted explosive evidence that was in the employer's possession that the employer desperately wanted to keep from the other side. And so I wanted to really push my students to resist their natural inclination to tell the client what the client wants to hear. Oh yeah, we can bury that evidence, we don't have to reveal it. The fact of the matter is the question was designed to get the student to go, look, I have to turn this over. The United States legal system is immensely powerful, uniquely powerful in the world in forcing people like employer to turn over explosive evidence like this. And so I explained this a bit and I said, look, I didn't use a racial slur on the exam at all, Dean. What I had written was N space and then B space for, this gender slur, which, you can say on TV, even according to the FCC. And so she says, oh, okay, well, like any rational person, she says, I thought that, you would use the entire word. What should we do about this? And I'm like, listen, spontaneously, I say to her, look, I don't want to just be gratuitously challenging to people. I'm not, I understand how stressful an exam is. I understand how stressful it has been over this past sort of COVID year for folks to be dealing with this, the racial reckoning that we've been dealing with on TV, et cetera. So listen, let me send a message to the class and say, hey, if my indirect reference to these slurs, made anybody feel, bad, I regret that. And if you want to talk to me about that or to anybody else at the school, dean, the vice dean, we have a dean for students, then by all means, please reach out. We're here to support you. And that didn't work, as we'll see in a second.
So not only did you offer voluntarily to send an apologetic letter to the students, but the students misportrayed what actually happened from the start. Am I getting that right?
No, I think that that's accurate. I mean, and the fact of the matter here is I have no idea to this day who suggested that this was a problem. I have a very, very strong suspicion that it was not anyone who was in that class. I have a very strong suspicion that someone might have offhandedly mentioned, hey, there was this question on my exam about X. And then someone who wasn't in the class at all, who had some sort of political axe to grind, decided, oh my gosh, here's our opportunity. And so before long, the Black Law Students Association, no one of which was in my class. I mean, in fact, there were a couple of people in my class, but they hadn't complained. I know that for a fact because they reached out to me. This Black Law Students Association, which it's an abbreviation, BLSA, we say BALSA. So BALSA put together this petition. And as I think you just fairly suggested, the petition quite clearly suggested that I had used the entire words. And it was absolutely unacceptable of me to be using this word. And they go into this long, diatribe about the, very, very negative history of that word, to which any reasonable person alive in the United States today says, I knew that already. We're talking about two different things. And if you think that a respectfully expurgated reference to that word is now equivalent to busting it out and calling someone that's real news to me. And that's really where all of this starts from my perspective. I mean, if someone thinks that I violated the sort of changing norms of interracial interaction, I guess I can acknowledge that. I mean, I don't know what the rules are. And if somebody says, hey, you can't do that anymore, I was not in any mood, and I still am not in any mood to sort of really fight back against that. But nobody warned me. And nobody treated me with 1 ounce of respect or human decency to go, hey, things have kind of changed. Could you just, send a regret message to your class and we'll just move past this. The university administration could have handled this quietly and constructively in 2 days. But instead, we have what we have now, and I've been under this relentless attack for a year.
So you get suspended ultimately, and you're told if you want to return to the classroom to teach, you have to undergo this sensitivity training. From what I've read, the training that you were subjected to used either the same or very similar redacted slurs that you had on your exam.
Right. I mean, this is straight out of the "you cannot make this up" file. It's unbelievable. So they assigned me to do this online sort of diversity course put together by Cornell University, which was frankly not that terrible. But they also, of course, wanted to make it more burdensome and painful for me. And so they assigned me a series of these supplemental readings, which concentrate on race. The Cornell program is quite balanced, and it focuses on diversity in every respect: gender, ethnicity, background, ability, a variety of other aspects. But UIC is obsessively, frankly, focused on race and race alone, to the exclusion of everything else. So they send me these supplemental readings, which by and large concentrate on racial issues. The very first thing that they send me, on like page 5, was talking about, some situation, and they go, for example, a white person who's overly friendly to Black people might be called a, quote, N space lover. Like, my eyes bugged out of my head. I'm like, you've subjected me to a year-long relentless campaign of torment because I wrote N space on my exam. And now the very first reading that you give me says N space in it. Like, this is clearly normative. I clearly did nothing wrong. This clearly was at best a colossal misunderstanding. And yet here we still are. And my lawyer has sent this thing right back to them and said, listen, we demand an explanation as to why the very first supplemental reading you're assigning this guy contains the very alleged horrific sin that you have been relentlessly tormenting him about for a year. Not surprisingly, we haven't received an answer.
And speaking of your lawyer, you obviously filed this lawsuit after all of this happened. I read the lawsuit over the weekend. I did my best to understand what was in it, but I'm no lawyer. There's a lot of legal jargon in there that can go over my head and certainly other people's heads. So for the sake of simplicity, can you outline the legal argument here, the reason that you're suing the school? What's in the lawsuit?
Well, part of the reason it's confusing for a non-lawyer is that there are so many arguments to present. We've witnessed quite a number of these kinds of cases that are based on the first basis in my lawsuit, which is the First Amendment. I'll explain that in a second. But it's extremely rare, actually, to see the kind of complete abject failure to follow the most basic rules of fairness here, which we call due process. And the university has completely fallen on its face on that score as well. So that's another basis. They've completely violated my academic freedom. That's another basis. So there's a lot going on. But I do think it's fair to to encapsulate the lawsuit as being a First Amendment lawsuit. First Amendment, as everyone I think probably well understands, is you can't be punished by a public actor for your speech. And immediately you've got to recognize, as I'm sure many people are responding, right? Well, you can't just say whatever you want, right? If you just yelled out at some student in the back, hey, and then used that word, you wouldn't be protected. Of course I wouldn't be. And this is the common reaction that I'm seeing in comment blog fields. I'm like, no, moron, you've got to understand that the First Amendment has built-in restrictions. I'm not suggesting, and no reasonable person ever would, that the First Amendment allows me to say whatever I want. But I know where the boundaries are, more or less. And having simply, offered my class a real world example, totally topic appropriate, pursuing a topic which we have pursued in class, not calling anybody this. I was referring to an expurgated word, not using it in any, right? That's First Amendment. I mean, if there's anything the First Amendment stands for, it's that we have to be able, particularly in educational context, we have to be able to have conversations about these kinds of things. Otherwise, we're in law school. How is any student ever supposed to be prepared to deal with how the law plays an important role in solving these problems that have faced our society for so long? So the most important aspect of my lawsuit, and the reason why FIRE is interested in this, is that it's about free expression. You can't punish someone for expressing themselves in a way that simply makes someone uncomfortable. That, if nothing else, is what the First Amendment stands for, and that's everything about what the university is doing to me here. I'm clearly being punished simply because one or more words that I chose in the educational context made someone feel uncomfortable. Whether you think that was a reasonable and rational reaction on their part or not, it's protected. If you have a problem with that, university, come talk to me. Treat me with the respect that I've earned after 20 years of teaching law. I'm a full tenured professor. You treat me with an ounce of decency and respect, and we can solve this and all be friends. That is not the path that the university has chosen. Segueing into the second, this is only the second thing I'll talk about, because again, the suit is a bit complicated, but the second big thrust of my lawsuit that I think distinguishes it fairly from others like mine is when the university launched this investigation of theirs, they relied on what were, I think to any reasonable person, obvious, scurrilous lies about what I had allegedly said in a class session, literally almost 2 years before. Right? So these young people, I don't even know who they are. I don't even know if they were ever in my class. I strongly suspect that they were not, as I mentioned a moment ago. These people were somehow coordinated to suggest to this diversity office at my university that I had said several things in one class session over the course of like literally 3 minutes that had made some people, feel, uncomfortable. All of it, again, was totally obvious, scurrilous lies. The problem, though, was this investigation was presented to me in such a way, it was impossible for me to even know what the allegations were. They were like sometime between January 2020 and January 2021, you used racially charged language in your class. And I'm like, what? Give me some idea what you're talking about here. Okay, because by the way, all of my classes, all of everyone in the law school's classes are recorded. If you have a problem with something that I allegedly said in class, let's figure out what day that occurred on. Let's listen to it together and let's talk about what happened. Well, one of the things that my lawsuit now reveals is the conclusions that this investigation made with respect to what I said in class are completely, patently false. This is an absolute hack job of an investigation by an investigator who herself was the president of the Black Law Students Association at her law school when she was in law school 2 or 3 years before joining this investigation. I mean, it's not a conflict of interest directly, but it clearly is a reason for people to say, do we really expect that person to be free entirely of bias against Professor Kilborn and to sort of take a sort of straightforward approach to this investigation? That's clearly not what happened here. So my due process, right, the things that you would expect an ordinary fair investigation to look like, this investigation looked nothing whatsoever like that. And you simply cannot, as a public institution, treat people in that way and then harm them without giving them fair notice of what the problem is and a fair opportunity to defend themselves.
Yeah, and your situation, one thing I've noticed is that it's similar to instances we've seen in the past with something like classic literature, where a professor or a teacher has gotten in trouble for reading an expletive or a slur in a book from way back when in an academic context, but they still get in trouble for it. Your case is similar, except, as you point out, you didn't even use the slur. You used a letter followed by blank spaces. So what do you think it says about the current state of our higher education institutions, where something seemingly so non-controversial can lead to this whole mess, a legal battle?
I'm afraid it says quite a lot, and I'm afraid what it says is extraordinarily scary. We have literally set back higher education 300 years before the Enlightenment. I mean, this is exactly the kind of debate that used to happen in medieval universities, where someone would say something like, for example, the sun doesn't revolve around the earth. And there would be this incredible inquiry into that, right? How in the world can anyone say such a horrifically, heretical thing? And so, I mean, I would not, before all of this exploded, have thought that putting N space on an exam in a question about employment discrimination would even be regarded as heretical. However extreme your view of, appropriate discourse might be, I would not think that crosses any lines. But one of the things that's really opened my eyes after all of this exploded in my face was there are examples out there that are even more extreme than mine, at least in terms of what the person originally did. I think the university's reaction in my case it just is beyond all boundaries, which is why I'm actually bringing a lawsuit rather than just going, oh, these people are crazy. But other examples that are out there, my favorite one is, there's a professor at Yale who has something to do with medical something, or like maybe it's psychology or something, but she was doing a field study. And I can't exactly recall what the subject of her study was, but she made a comment at some point in a paper about this study in which she expressed surprise that residents of rural Ohio might have a taste for artisanal coffee. She wouldn't have expected that. Before very long, there was an enormous firestorm from these crazy extreme leftist Yale students who characterized that comment of hers about rural Ohioans as being, quote, dehumanizing. It was dehumanizing for her to suggest that these rural Ohioans probably wouldn't have a taste for artisanal coffee. And you just have to read it 2 or 3 times to go, am I getting this right? I mean, you can't believe that this is how normal people, well-educated people, at the absolute flagship of the higher education industry in the United States, Yale University, they're behaving in this way. These are our future leaders, right? George Bush went to Yale. Lots of other very famous people whom we all could recognize have gone to these places, and they are completely falling apart at the seams. If you can't have a conversation involving N space or mentioning rural Ohioans' taste for artisanal coffee, I mean, where are we now? Another of my favorite examples is this professor, I can't recall where this was, simply mixed up the names of 2 young Black men who had been in that class inadvertently, right? This happens all the time with white people, with all kinds of other people. You just forget their names, right? We don't, these people aren't our, lifelong friends. And of course, they point this out. He tries to apologize, which, by the way, if there's any professors out there listening, understand one lesson of the current rules of engagement. Apologies are like throwing lighter fluid on the fire. Never, 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 never apologize, period. Because the apology, as in this case, led to an increased firestorm. Oh, his apology wasn't clear enough, and it wasn't this enough, and it wasn't that enough, and it made us feel dehumanized. And once again, you just have to grab your head and go, am I hearing this right? Because this poor professor mixes up a couple names, goes, hey, sorry, right? One last comment on this. Where is this bringing us in higher education? I mean, I would have thought, as I was quoted as saying very early on in this whole ordeal, I would have thought that we would all agree as members of civilized society that if you're walking along the street and you inadvertently bump into somebody and you quick turn around and go, hey, sorry about that, we would all agree that the appropriate reaction of the person who's been bumped into is not to pounce on you and kick you in the head until you are bleeding. Apparently, I was wrong. There is a very large segment of people in our society, many of whom are among the students and particularly among the faculty and administration at higher education institutions today, who believe all the old rules are off. Those old rules too significantly constrain us. They were written by people whom we hate. They stand for terrible things that we oppose, and therefore all bets are off. We write the rules now. And if you inadvertently bump into us, and God forbid if you say you're sorry, we will beat the living hell out of you. And it's an open question of whether we'll let you even live or not. I mean, thank goodness I have tenure. I never in a gazillion years would have thought that tenure was going to be required to save my job for this utterly ridiculous thing that has just happened to me. This is not what tenure is supposed to stand for.
Well, and the current state of academia today, as we've reported on for years here at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform, is obviously just saturated in leftist bias, this liberal bureaucracy that's just been dominating higher ed for years now. And it's almost like it's not even a different standard or a new standard. It's an anti-standard, a standard that has inverted our old standards that we all used to be able to agree on and cherish and enjoy.
Yes.
In closing, I want to ask you if there's any update on this lawsuit. Maybe there's an inside scoop that you can share with our audience about where you're currently at in this process.
I wish that I had the inside scoop that University Council received this thing and said, oh, hey, wow, we now see you're serious and let's actually have a conversation. No. We have heard absolute radio silence from them. I don't expect that we're going to hear anything from them. As we've seen in so many other university cases like this, University Counsel believes his job or her job in every of these cases is not to act reasonably and try to seek compromise. It is to circle wagons, dig trenches, don't admit anything, don't recognize that we've got some problems here. I could have partnered with the university to overcome this public relations firestorm, to have this be a teaching moment for us all, to come back together with healing and understanding, and everyone would have benefited. That's not only not the choice that UIC made, UIC Council is very clearly directing us toward a totally unnecessary knockdown, drag out war. And I'll tell you, I'm ready for it. Fire's ready for it. I have almost nothing to lose. You've already destroyed my reputation entirely. I have tenure. There's no reason for you whatsoever to try to fire me. And it's about time somebody's held accountable for this business. The far left loves to talk about accountability. Well, let's have some accountability on your side now. We haven't heard anything about this, and I strongly don't suspect we will until they throw some ridiculous nonsense back at us by way of defense.
Do you think that this lawsuit will make its way through the courts and get hashed out, or do you think the university will end up settling?
I don't think that the university could give me a settlement offer that I would accept. I'm not interested in settling. I don't want anything from the university. I want them to be told in no uncertain terms, there's this thing called the First Amendment. You might not be familiar with it. You obviously are not familiar with it, right? We just became UIC's law school. So they're kind of getting used to having some lawyers on campus. Well, I've got news for you, UIC. This lawyer is not going to be pushed around. Part of our job as public servants is to teach our students, and now apparently to teach the university, that the law actually matters. You can't just ignore all the rules. So no, we're not settling unless they agree to the very simple things that I told them to do, which they're not going to. They want to be able to write the rules on the fly as they see fit. It's not going to happen. I don't think this is going to go to a trial. Trials are about juries resolving factual disputes. There's no factual dispute really here. The question is, can the university run roughshod over the First and Fifth Amendments? The answer, I think and hope, is no. And before long, I think we're going to be able to get a chance to ask a court to tell UIC by way of what we call summary judgment, you lose. Go and follow the rules. That'll be the end of it.
I think that's a lesson a lot of people would be wise to learn, is that there is no compromising on your rights, and there is no compromising on the truth. So props to you for that. And Professor Jason Kilborn from the University of Illinois, Chicago, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end of this video. If you like what you saw, don't forget to like down below. Leave a comment while you're there. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. These things really do help. Thanks again for watching. Follow us at Campus Reform on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter if you aren't already. We'll see you next time.